Have you ever noticed that you act differently around different people? You act differently around your boss than you do your coworkers, than you do the girls at the bridal shower, than you do around your kids. And sometimes you go home to your parents and suddenly you feel like you're 8 years old again. I think we've all had that experience. Or sometimes you act so out of character, you have this huge reaction, or you say something to someone in a way where you drive away thinking, oh my God, that wasn't me. Why did I act like that? Well, it actually is you. It's just a different part of you. And we're going to talk about that right now, how that manifests in your life, your job, your relationships, and how that affects every aspect of your being. For context, I'm Dr. Kathy Gruver. I have a PhD in natural health. I have been studying mind-body medicine for over 30 years, including 5 times at the Benson Henry Institute for Mind-Body Medicine at Harvard. I've done 2 TEDx talks, and I have done lectures and workshops over 350 times worldwide on 5 continents, 3 cruise ships, and a handful of islands, for big corporations like Merck, as well as the US Postal Service and everything in between. And in this video, I'm going to explain why you act differently around different people, what's actually happening when this goes on, where this came from, and how we can harness this to make you less stressed, less reactive, a better communicator, a better leader. And if you think this isn't going to affect you at work, it sure is. Because if you are stuck in a state that is not appropriate for the task at hand, you're not going to be as good as your job. You're going to have that reactivity. Your communication is going to start to fail. So stay tuned. We're going to dive in to internal family systems. So first off, let's be clear about something. We all have different aspects of ourselves. We all have different parts. And this was based on Jungian archetypes. This was described as far back into the 60s. And now it's known very specifically as internal family systems by Richard Schwartz. He really popularized this, especially in the last 10 years. He's written multiple books on the subject. But even before him, there was resource states, there were ego states, there was parts work in hypnosis. And I've been working with this system for about 10 years. I do this with all of my coaching clients, and I'm going to be referring to some cards called interactive cards. I love these as a tool. I am not affiliated with them. I get no money if you go buy this, but this woman's cards are absolutely incredible, and you can find them online. They illustrate the different parts of us, and we're going to get to that in a second. So these parts that we all have are formed in childhood. They are there as a way to protect ourselves, not only from outside things, but also from other parts of ourselves. They're also there to make sure we fit in. Because as a kid, we have 2 driving needs. We have to be accepted by our parents, our family, our tribe, because that means we're going to be safe, healthy, and protected. We also have to be seen for our authentic self. And let's be honest, at some point, we realize that there's conditional love. And I don't care how great you think your parents were, at some point, even a little bit, there was conditional love. They loved you when you were getting straight A's, when you were quiet and leaving mommy alone, when you weren't bugging daddy, when you caught that football, when you shot that basket and it went in, when you looked pretty in the dress, when you were quiet, when you did the perfect dance recital. So often our love is based on this external things, these accomplishments that we have. But there were times where maybe you were sad, maybe you were upset about something, maybe you were throwing a tantrum, maybe you were running around Target or throwing poop on the wall in the hallway, and they didn't quite love you as much, right? So this is where these states come from. Now, as I explain these, I tend to go in between using the word parts and the word ego states, so I'm referring to the same thing, just so you know. So going back to childhood, as we realize that there's this thing called conditional love and that we need to behave and act and do certain things to actually be loved, we start to form these parts to cover that. We might start to form a pleasing part so that we can keep the peace in the house. We might form a helper part where we go out of our way to do things to help. We might form this sort of negotiating part, right? I see this a lot with kids where the parents have conflict, where the kid tries to negotiate with the mom and dad to make sure they don't get divorced, they're not unhappy, they're not fighting. Maybe we get an angry part that really bubbles up and we start to have this uncontrollable angry part. All of these parts are normal, and again, they come from childhood as a way to adapt to the situation that we're in. For example, the pleasing part comes typically from one of 2 things. Either your house was so perfect that you didn't want to do anything wrong because you didn't want to make waves. Or on the flip side of that, everything was chaos, and you thought if you were just perfect, everything would be okay. You didn't want to add to the chaos. So these parts can come from various places. I know that my mom, from the time I shot out of the womb, she wanted me to be a dancer. And when I was obedient and went to dance class, when I was obedient and a good girl and went to church because she also wanted me to do that, then I had a very different reaction from her than when my rebel came out and went, why do I have to go to church? I don't want to go to dance class. And I learned to just stuff it and just keep it inside, right? Shut up, grin and bear it, just go do the thing, please your mother. This is part of where my parts came from. So we're going to get into more detail about those in a little bit. So these parts are also formed to protect us from trauma, and it doesn't have to be big T trauma. It can be little t trauma. I think we all had an experience where we turned around in the grocery store or the department store and we couldn't see our mom for a second. And we had this moment of abandonment, of panic, of fear, right? And they were probably right around the corner. They simply turned and went to the other aisle, or they started talking to somebody and we didn't realize they were there. Or we walked off and they didn't realize we were gone. And then we have this sudden realization of, oh my God, I'm all alone. So these parts are formed from what can be really small, now as our adult brain thinks, seemingly inconsequential things. But as a little kid, these can be a really big deal. So these are also formed from big T trauma, the assaults, the neglect, those types of things. I am not getting into trauma. I am trauma informed in my work, but this is not the place for me to start diving into deep trauma. But know that that's where these parts came from. So from the research that's been done, these are not psychological concepts. These are not made up things. These are actually hardwired into our brain. We all have them. And sometimes the different parts actually have different handwriting. They might sound different. They certainly behave differently. There was a play I saw years ago. I don't remember what it was called, but it was such a great illustration of this. It was a boyfriend and a girlfriend. They had been together for a while and they were going home for the first time so that he could meet her parents. And so they have this scene of them getting ready to go and the nerves and all this stuff. And then the scene ends and the next scene is at the parents' house and it shows the parents in the living room and you hear ding dong from off screen, off the set. And the parents open the door and they go, ah! And they hug the daughter and it's like a 10-year-old. And then the boyfriend's there, a full-grown adult. And the rest of the show, anytime the leading female character was around the parents, it was a child portraying that. And the whole point of this was to say how often we revert back to childhood habits and childhood things when we are around our parents. Sometimes it's because they treat us like that, and sometimes it's just because that's what we do. We just become kids again. Hopefully, as you get older and develop an adult relationship with your parents, you don't have to do that because not everyone does. I think we all have at least had a glimpse of that, maybe the first time home from college or the first time after a long time of being away, we just kind of go back to that. That's us reverting back to an ego state. So let's talk about how many. So we typically have about 10 to 15 parts that we see most often, but we can have up to 100 different aspects of ourselves, right? And I think by this point, you're recognizing what I'm talking about, how you are different around your boss than you are around your kids, than you are around people out at a bar. You can see this in people, and it's so fascinating for me to watch. It's become almost sort of a party game, sort of parlor trick for me, where I'll just kind of sit back and observe people. And I see this a lot if I'm out in bars. I don't go to bars often, but when I do, I tend to observe this. There's maybe two guys talking at the bar and they're just having a normal conversation. And the second a pretty girl is around, suddenly the conversation becomes bigger. And, I finished that $1 million deal and I just got my Porsche redone out of the shop. There's suddenly this bravado that comes over these guys, right? And I remember sitting there thinking, wow, ego state shift. Or somebody says something that's maybe mildly offensive to you, or sort of like one of those backhanded compliments where you're not sure how to take it. And you can see this moment of hurt in someone. If you start to observe this in the people around you, you're going to notice people shifting states. But we'll talk about that in a second. So I have worked diligently on mapping my parts. And what I did, and we'll talk about this later, is I went and got one of those blank book journals. And at the top of every page, I wrote down what the ego state was, what the part was. And we'll get into naming and mapping parts in a second, but just to let you know, I have done this for a couple of years now. And at this point to date, I think I've ended up with 97. Some of these you don't see very often. Some of these are more like satellites of other parts. So when I started doing this, I thought I had one leader, one manager, one hurt little kid, no. I got dozens of hurt little kids. I have dozens of aspects of anger and frustration. This is where tapping into emotion is going to be really important. But I have parts that, again, they're sort of these satellite parts that you don't see very often, but they're there. And it's important to at least recognize those top like 5 to 10 to 15 that we see most often. And I'm going to get into why in a little bit. But this is a beautiful method for getting to know yourself. For me personally, I'm a huge fan of us getting to know ourselves. Know thyself truly is one of the most beautiful statements ever said. Because the better we know ourselves, the better leaders we can be, the better communicators, the better we're going to be in relationships, the better we're going to be at our job. We're going to be more successful. We're going to be more compassionate. We're going to be more present to the people around us. So this is one of my favorite tools for that. And you can go to your favorite bookstore or get on your favorite online bookshop, and you're going to find dozens of books about ego states, resource states, internal family systems. Richard Schwartz just wrote a really incredible book called No Bad Parts. And it's true, none of these parts are bad. All of them are trying to help us. We'll talk about that in more detail in just a little bit. But I like this book. My only issue with it is it's still pretty advanced. It's one of the first books that's been written for sort of lay people. When I started studying this, all the books that I was reading were really textbooky and very geared towards psychologists, psychiatrists, coaches, that sort of thing. This is made for the common man, but it's still pretty advanced, and it gets into the spiritual realm that a lot of my unwoo friends found a little too woo-woo. So there's some really good stuff in it. There's some great exercises. I highly suggest, if you enjoy this, to look into doing it, and you can always contact me for coaching. So let's move on. So one thing I really want to emphasize at this point, because for those of you who do know a little bit about psychology or psychiatry, this sounds a lot like what used to be called multiple personality disorder, now known as DID or dissociative identity disorder. This is very different. So in this circumstance with parts and ego states, internal family systems, resource states, you know they exist. Like, as I'm saying this to you, you can recognize, oh yeah, I behave differently around my husband than I do around the guys at the office than I do around. You are probably at this point right there with me saying, oh yeah, I totally get what she's talking about. For someone who has DID, dissociative identity disorder, they often, until they get into treatment and care, don't recognize that they have other parts. They might wake up in the morning wearing clothes that they didn't think were theirs, with lipstick that isn't their color, with a wristband from a bar they've never been to, and the person next to them is calling them Beth when their name is Mary. So often in dissociative identity disorder, and this is a very complicated disorder, so this is a very surface level explanation, you have one main part and then you have these satellite parts that are hidden from the main part. So often you might have memory lapses and things where you go, well, that was weird, I don't remember that happening. That means another part took you over and you have no conscious knowledge of it for the most part. This is completely different. This is, oh, I know I'm going to go into this meeting, so I need to do this right. I'm going to bring out my strong leader part. Or, oh, I need to be a little more gentle with this. I'm going to bring out sort of my parent part because I need to talk to this little kid and really help them to understand that punching their brother in the face is not a good idea. Or you feel overwhelmed by anger. You feel it coming. You know you're angry. So this is how it differs from DID. One thing I will say, if you have a very forward-facing psychological disorder like bipolar or schizophrenia or DID, this is probably not a great system for you. So if you want to start exploring this and you do have a psychological diagnosis or you're on psychotropic meds, please talk to your doctor, your psychologist, your psychiatrist about whether this is a good thing for you to explore. It can be a little touchy if you already have some underlying things going on. So just be safe. Make sure you're not diving into something that's going to be dangerous for you. So the next thing is, and this is one of the easiest ways to categorize this, is there's sort of sections or categories of parts, and we all, again, have these. So I'm going to go through them. One thing I do want to start this section off by saying is, again, just to quote Dick Schwartz, there are no bad parts. Even the parts of ourselves that we don't like, where we get home and go, oh, I hate when I act like that, or, oh God, I hate that part of myself. Even that part that's trying to help you, right? So even those parts that are harming us, even those parts that are cutting, that are drinking, that are addictive, that are doing these sort of extreme behaviors, they think they're helping. They really think they're solving the problem. So right off the bat, let me give you the two overarching categories of parts. So we have the proactive parts. These are the managers. They tend to take things ahead of time. They anticipate what the problem is going to be, and they try to solve the problem before it happens. If that doesn't work, then the reactive parts come in. And these are the firefighters and the distractors. In the real outside world, firefighters are great, right? But the firefighters in this case are the ones that have incredibly extreme reactions. These are the ones that turn to addiction, the cutting, the hair pulling, all of these types of things. The distractors are the ones that might go with the well, distraction, just like it says, the gambling, the addiction, the smoking, the drinking, or the shutdown, right? I have had clients in my office where I'm doing couples coaching, and often this is the way it goes. The woman is expressing something that the husband has repeatedly done wrong, and I look over at the husband and he's gone. There is nothing there. And I can't continue the session because he is not with me to hear this, right? This is the video game thing. This is the porn thing. This is when you want to do something to distract from your life. And so I stop the coaching session and I turn to whoever just kind of left me and I say, hey, it looks like you kind of disappeared. It looks like a wall went up. Can we break through that, or do we need to change the subject? And I give them the option to change, because I want to make sure that you're actually there hearing me. And if you're off someplace else, it's not going to work. You're not with us, right? So distractors and firefighters are kind of their own little category. But other than that, so we have our managers. These are the managers that they get our pants on and they get us to work, and it helped me set up this whole system today. So we all have a manager part. This is the one that sort of runs the show. We can mistakenly think that the manager is us, it's self. I'll get to what self is in a minute, but the manager and self are different things. This is one of the parts that we put on top. So managers are one of our parts. We all have a biological part, right? It keeps us eating, sleeping, drinking water, exercising, reproducing, all of these things. So we all have a biological part. And I think we know what happens when we ignore our biological part, right? When our manager's like, I gotta work, I gotta work, I gotta work, I gotta work. And the biological part's like, it's 2 a.m. Can I go to bed? This is where parts in conflict start to come in. So I also think we've all had that experience where we're up in the middle of the night, what-ifing, we're worrying, we're running through our to-do list. This is when a worry part or a manager part is sort of overriding the biological part. And we'll talk about parts in conflict in a little bit. I want to go back to the types of parts. So the next type of part is the pleasing part. We all want to help. We all want to make sure the people around us are happy, healthy, well-fed, well-loved, all of these things. But sometimes the pleasing part can get out of control. This is one of the parts that tends to, in some categories of people, really get out of control. When you find your identity by pleasing, when you find that the only way people will like you, you perceive that the only way people will like you is if you please, please, please. You volunteer for the 37th bake sale in a row when you didn't want to do the first 36, right? You tend to not even have yourself on a to-do list and you put everybody else above you. This is the typical, like, Jewish mom, the Catholic mom that, oh no, you guys eat first and I'll just, this is that pleasing thing that tends to get in the way of us being happy and healthy. So if you find your pleasing parts get out of control, we can explore that. The next thing is the protectors. Now, all of these parts are out to protect us, but we do have specific protectors that will stand up and make sure we are protected. Sometimes we have a really like superhero or almost like army guy part that comes up to protect, that will defend. It tends to get angry. Maybe it puts, those lines in the sand, that sort of thing. The next type of part are vulnerable parts. These tend to be very young. They tend to be hurt. They tend to be filled with shame. These are called exiles in internal family systems. Other systems have other names for them, but they're basically now in this world that we're living in, they're known as exiles. The reason they're called exiles is because one of the goals of this whole system of these parts is to keep everything balanced. And it is believed amongst these parts that if these hurt little kids come and act out, that it's going to disrupt the whole system. So the protector parts keep the exile sort of in the background. They keep them shoved down, kind of like the bad kid in the back of the class, right? The teacher's like, oh my God, just sit back there and don't bother anybody. But every once in a while, that exile's triggered and this comes out and can create all of this chaos. The protectors step in and defend and protect that little kid part. I'll give you a couple examples of that later. But so we have these kind of big protector parts that can step in. We also have rebels. Everybody has a rebel. I'm going to say that again because there's a lot of people who are like, no, I don't. Everybody has a rebel. If you didn't have a rebel, you'd still be sitting on your parents' lap. You wouldn't have left home. You wouldn't have said no. It's the rebel in us that causes us to stand up for things that are wrong. It's the rebel in us that causes us to march on Washington and write a letter to our congressman and give money to the causes that we believe in. The rebel is that little kid that picks up the food off the high chair and goes, And the parent says no, and they go, and they throw it anyway. This is the development of the rebel. We all have it. It is a good part. Sometimes our rebel is the one that saves us from all the other parts. So we'll get into more detail. Again, we talked about distractors and firefighters. These are the reactive parts when the proactive parts can't handle it. We also have worry parts, right? We all worry about things. We all have that anxious part. We all have that up in the middle of the night, what ifing part. And again, for some of us, that part can get extreme. And in that extremeness, it causes generalized anxiety. It causes us to worry about things all the time. Sometimes it can be the checking. Oh God, did I turn off the stove? And then you are constantly checking those things. Again, if you have a big diagnosis like OCD or an anxiety disorder, make sure you talk to your doctor before you start diving into this sort of thing. But those parts can cause mild versions of those issues. We all have sad parts. We all have nurturing parts we want to take care of. We want to take care of the puppy or the baby. Some of those are stronger than others. I have a very nurturing part, but I've never had a desire to have kids. So apparently my nurturing part wasn't quite nurturing in that direction. But give me an animal and I am the first one to make sure they are cozy and loved and hugged and petted. We all have spiritual parts that guide us in one way or another. And these are the main categories of parts. And the reason I like to give you the categories is sometimes it's easier to identify them if you have categories. These can be found online. These are everywhere. But just know this is a great way to divide up your parts. And by the way, if you're watching this and you want to bring this content to your next event or your next office, let me know. Go ahead and click the link in the description. It'll take you right to my website where you can book a call with me and we can explore how this can help you, your organization, your firm, your office to be better communicators, better leaders, and really start to interact with those guiding parts that can be the natural leaders that you all have. So here's the other thing. We can switch parts incredibly fast because before we even know it, we are reacting to something. So I'm going to go back and use the interactive cards, and I'm going to give you an example of how fast we can switch parts. So you get home from work, you've had an incredibly crappy day, and you are starving. Your physical, healthy body part says, why don't we make a nice big salad? But you've just seen an advertisement for ice cream. You want ice cream. Your judge comes out and says, hey, we said it's swimsuit season, no more ice cream for dinner. Your body image part comes out and says, yeah, you're right. I'm a fat cow. I'm never going to lose those 5 pounds. I feel terrible about myself. And so your shameful kid comes out because you've been teased for things your entire life. So next thing you know, Happy Pig comes out, you're having Haagen-Dazs for dinner. At this point during my live talk, someone inevitably goes, were you at my house last night? This is how quick this stuff changes. And we can see this happen in others often easier than we can see this happen in ourselves. So if you're noticing your ego states change, this is good. This is a very good thing if you can start to identify these parts and notice when they change. So another way I see this switching often is perhaps you're a high-powered exec at your office. You're a CEO. And you walk into the house and suddenly you bring your CEO-ness back home and you're ordering the kids around and you're lecturing them for not doing the thing. And you talk to your husband as if he's your subordinate. That can cause big problems. Or you bring your momness to the office and you find that you're the mother hen and everyone's coming to you with their problems and you get to comfort them and not really your role at the office. So sometimes there's a mismatch. Sometimes we find ourselves exhibiting a state that isn't appropriate for the environment. And this can be a big problem. This can hold us back from promotions. This can get in the way of our work relationships and our communication if we are having a mismatch of states. The other thing that can be a problem, as I sort of mentioned before, is when our states are in conflict, when part of us wants to do this and part of us wants to do that. And this is the other way I know this is an absolutely real thing, because how often have we said that? God, part of me wants to ask that guy out, another part of me is really afraid, or a part of me wants to go skydiving, but another part of me is really scared. The other thing about switching states is we can switch them so fast. So we have this bravado. I'm going to go jump out of a plane this week and it's going to be so much fun. We're going to, and you get all into it. And then you find yourself sitting on the edge of the plane going, what the hell was I thinking? Why did I sign up for this? Oh my God. That's an ego state shift. I have had numerous people call me. I'm a hypnotherapist. I've had numerous people call me to quit smoking. And on the phone, they're like, you know what? I'm done with this. I'm tired of it. I smell. My family hates it. I'm going to die. It's expensive. I'm ready. And I go, okay. Then they come to my office a week later and they're like, well, I mean, maybe if I could just cut back. I don't need to quit. A different person called me, then showed up in my office. So the first thing I have to do is get back to that state that actually called me and said they wanted to quit. Maybe you've had experiences like that where you say yes to something and then the time comes and you're like, I actually don't want to do this. So let me just address really quick the benefit of recognizing parts. So when you start to recognize when someone around you is shifting parts or when you are shifting parts, you have a better ability to communicate with them. If you have a conversation with a coworker and they suddenly go into a different state and you recognize that, you will have the ability to alter how you communicate with them, to alter how you show up for that person. If you see them suddenly be hurt or suddenly be distant or that wall comes up, if you can recognize that, then you're going to have an advantage in how you work with that person. I'll give you an example. When I first started dating my husband, we live in a loft. So there's no foot of the bed. The foot of the bed is a wrought iron gate, kind of like, railing, so you don't fall into the kitchen. So when I make the bed, I have to do this like stunt roll to the other side and make the bed. And I got to go back and forth. It's really a pain in the butt. It's kind of fun, but it's still a pain in the butt. So I said, I'm going to go upstairs and make the bed. He said, oh, do you want help? And I said, oh, thanks, honey. I appreciate that. So we go upstairs and he gets on his side and I get on my side and I put the fitted sheet on and he puts his end of the fitted sheet on. Ladies, you're going to totally understand this. His side of the fitted sheet was sticking up by like that much. And I looked at it and went, and I reached over and I fixed it. And he watched me do that and went, oh, great. I can't do anything right. I recognized that he went into this sort of shameful, I did it wrong little kid state. And there was sort of a bossy part of me that wanted to go, who the F cares, right? Like, it's just like, get over it. Now, what would that have done? That would have not been a good response. That's what I wanted to say. I heard in my head, part of me go, who cares? That wouldn't have been, So I acknowledged that part. Great. Yeah, thanks. And then I said to him instead, oh, babe, I'm sorry. I'm so anal with the bed. I say, well, thanks for help. When we're done with this, do you want to go for a walk? And he went, oh, okay, great. Thanks. I could have made that situation so much worse if I went with my immediate reaction. And if you've watched any of my other videos before, reaction is what gets us in trouble. This system, this ego state, parts work thing gives us the opportunity to respond to the person that's sitting in front of us, not who we think it is, but what we're actually seeing. So the more you know yourself, the more you observe this in other people, the better you're going to be at work, in negotiation and communication and problem solving. This is magic. So let's talk about my main ego state. So my main state, using, again, the interactive cards, is Capricorn. I'm going to stop you right there. This has nothing to do with astrology. I don't care what sign you are. It does not matter. This is called Capricorn because she wants to be called Capricorn. Now, I do happen to be a Capricorn. And for those of you who do know about astrology, Capricorn is very anal retentive, controlling, go, go, go. This is Capricorn, right? So just because you're a Virgo or you're an Aries, this does not affect your states. And be very clear with that, because I've had people come up to me after an hour-long workshop and go, well, I'm a Virgo. Oh, okay, great. So you organize your CDs different than me, the Capricorn. He likes to be called Capricorn. Now, as you start to chart your states, you can call them by kind of what they do, or if they have a name that they want to be called, to call them that. This is Capricorn. Capricorn is amazing. She got me my PhD. She wrote 8 books. She sits down and does these videos. She's organized. She's a great communicator, a natural leader. She's amazing. But at her worst, Capricorn is bossy, a workaholic, cold, anal retentive, kind of a bitch. She'll ignore everything else to make sure she gets what she wants. And that's sort of her shadow side, right? So all of these states think they're helping us. And even the useful, what we call the really helpful ones, like the pleaser and the, can have a shadow side. When it gets to an extreme and it starts to do a job that is more than it needs to be doing, that's when it becomes an issue. So Capricorn is great. She's amazing. But on the bad side, she can really interfere with my well-being. Capricorn and my self-care part were always in conflict. If I would take a bath, if I would get a massage, if I would lay by the pool, if I would, Capricorn was right there going, don't you have work to do? Why are you wasting time? You could be doing things. You should be accomplishing more. Go, 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 go. That was Capricorn. Capricorn in my household has become a verb. So my husband and I have sat down with these cards, and we've charted our parts, and we've talked about how our parts affect other parts and how our parts affect each other's parts. So Capricorn means we've got to get stuff done, right? So it got to a point where like I'd come home from work and he would say, "Do you need to Capricorn more, or can we start dinner?" So we know each other's parts so intimately well, and it was Capricorn when he messed up the bed that wanted to say, "Who cares? Just do it," right? Capricorn has gotten me through multiple things. I'll give you a couple very visceral examples. So let me tell you the origin story of Capricorn. So there's a couple ways that she was sort of born into my life as a part of me. When I was a kid, I was pretty horribly bullied, teased, picked on, and beat up, starting in about fifth grade. And I noticed, and this went all the way through high school, and I noticed this tended to happen when I wasn't busy. It happened during study hall, recess, lunchtime. And so Capricorn kind of popped up and went, let's just keep you busy. If you don't stop moving, no one can hurt you. So during recess, I would hang with the cafeteria ladies. During lunch, I would go sit in the band room. I never took another study hall. I would take class after class after class. The other thing this did is this allowed me to accomplish more and more and more. And there was a part of me that thought, if I just keep doing, if I just keep getting better at all of this stuff, my parents will finally love me. Now, I had a pretty damn good childhood growing up. I wasn't neglected, I wasn't abused, but there was still that conditional love, right? If I didn't get straight A's, I was doing something wrong. And I'm going to be really honest, I suck at math. I was horrible at math. If it wasn't for the kid next to me in geometry that let me occasionally glance over at his paper, I wouldn't have made it through. I was terrible at math. But my parents were told when I was young how smart I was. Horrible thing to say to parents without the explanation of, but she's not going to be perfect at everything. Parents out there, if your kid is labeled gifted or advanced or whatever it is, know that they're not going to be perfect at everything. My parents expected me to be perfect at everything. And if I got a bad grade in math, I would get punished. I would get grounded. I would not be able to do my activities. And it wasn't like I was screwing around and not trying. I just didn't get it. I just wasn't smart in that way. Word problems, forget it. I still won't get on a train for fear they're going to make me figure out when I have to go through Baltimore. Don't they have people figuring that out? Okay, but I digress. Anyway, so Capricorn came up and kind of did this thing of, well, if we just keep you busy, if we just keep you accomplishing, if we just keep you doing, then they can't hurt you. And this continued up until probably 7 or 8 years ago when I recognized that's what was happening. I had started studying this process, and I realized that there were so many times in my life that Capricorn sort of came to the forefront of what was happening and rescued me from a lot of things. And there were times that she really got out of control and screwed things up. So let me give you a couple examples of how Capricorn has worked. So I've done 2 TEDx talks. And on my second one, I left Santa Barbara. I was driving to LA to do the talk. It was a Friday night, so I left pretty early because of traffic. And I got a call in the morning from my dad, who lives in Pittsburgh, and said, hey, I got to go back to the ER. My pneumonia isn't gone. Now, we all knew the pneumonia wasn't gone. I don't know why they sent him home from the hospital in the first place. But his primary care doc, who seemed pretty good, said, hey, Paul, why don't you go to the emergency room? That'll be the easiest way for you to get admitted. So he called me in the morning and he said, hey, heading back to the ER, I'll let you know when I have a room. And I recognize it's a great hospital, but man, he could sit there for hours and not get a room. So as I'm driving down to LA, I look at the time and it's like 3 or 4 o'clock LA time, which means it's 6 or 7 o'clock Pittsburgh time. And I'm like, God, does he still not have a room? So as I'm thinking that, I see my phone ring and it's his girlfriend, Carol. And I answer the phone. I'm on the freeway, driving through LA. And I said, hey, Carol, what's going on? Does my dad not have a room yet? And she goes, where are you? And I said, well, I'm in the car. I'm driving down to do my TEDx talk. And she said, are you sitting down? And my smartass part came out and went, yeah, I'm driving. Kind of the only way to do that. And she says, Kathy, I'm so sorry your dad just died. Oh, man, didn't expect to hear that. And I was hit from this news and I went into complete and utter shock. My dad was my best friend. My mom died when I was young. And so I knew he was not doing great. I didn't know he was not doing that not great. And so she started talking to me about, arrangements and when can I come home and all of these things. And I said, Carol, I said, I'm so sorry. I can't have this conversation with you. I said, one, I'm driving. I said, and two, I need to go do this talk. My dad would want me to go do this TEDx talk. I said, what do you need to know right now from me? I answered two or three of her questions. And I said, I'm sorry. Give me a couple hours. I'm going to go do my talk and then I will call you right back and I'll come home as soon as I can. I called two people to tell them this had happened. And then I realized the more I talked about this, I was being lost into a grief, loss, fear, anger, ego states. I couldn't let that happen. So I thought, I've got to hold this together. So I rehearsed my talk in the car, and it was so overwhelming to me. I actually couldn't remember my talk. I couldn't remember the first word of how this talk started. And so luckily I had recorded it. So I listened to the recording a couple times and I kept running my talk and kept running my talk. And when I showed up to the event center, I found the organizer and I said, hi, I'm Kathy Gruver. I said, I need to tell you something and you cannot mention it to anybody else. I just found out my father died. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Don't say anything. I said, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to do my talk and I'm going to go. I said, I've got to go first. I said, I don't know what your lineup was, but I need to go make arrangements and get back east. She said, oh, what can I do? I said, I'm telling you what to do. Don't tell anybody. Give me a task to do, and I got to go. So we had like an hour before the talk. If I stopped moving, I was going to crumble, and there's no way I could retrieve myself. So I started folding programs, and I helped them with the lights, and I helped them set up the big TEDx thing on the red carpet. And the time comes, I do my talk. It was perfect. It was flawless. They laughed, they cried. It was amazing. I said, thank you very much. And I handed the microphone off to the next person. And I got backstage and I crumbled to the ground in tears. And everybody else that was doing their talks were like, wait, how bad was her talk? Because they didn't know anything had gone wrong. And I was just sobbing. I fell into this place of grief and deep, deep sorrow. And it was Capricorn that allowed me to get through that. We've all probably had an experience where we have to bring up this strong part, that iron, exterior thing to get through something like a funeral, a talk, that sort of thing, a hard diagnosis. And Capricorn did what she needed to do. She got me through the talk, and then I crumbled and ended up going home. The other cool example of when Capricorn came out, I was in Vegas doing a naturopath conference, and sharing our hotel with the naturopath conference was roller derby girls. If you don't know what roller derby girls are, they put on these crazy outfits and they tend to have like crazy nicknames and they go around a rink and they knock each other down. That's not exactly what it is, but it's pretty close. Go watch it. It's actually fascinating. So whole hotel of roller derby girls. I went down for the opening night mixer. I was speaking the next day and I decided I'm going to go to bed early so that I'm fresh for my talk. And I get in the elevator at the hotel in Vegas. And I hear all this commotion, all this cacophony outside the elevator. And the roller derby girls had decided to see how many people they could fit in the elevator. So they start pouring into the elevator and I'm shoved up against the back. And I'm like, oh my God, oh my God. And they finally get about 30 people in the elevator and the doors strain to close. And the alarm is going off by this point. And the elevator goes, whoop, and we drop about a foot, which was not a pleasant experience. And the alarms are going off and the fire and the police had to be called. And they're laughing and they're screaming and they're having a grand old time. And I'm shoved against the back. And one of them said, oh my God, there's somebody else in here. And at that moment, I felt so clearly in my being that I had a choice. I could either say, and I could have fun. They were passing around a bottle of Jack. I could have done shots with these girls in the elevator. There was one guy in there for some reason. I could have had a blast with these girls, or I was going to turn to raging bitch. Well, raging bitch won. And I'm like, God, and I'm swearing and I'm yelling at these girls and the one guy. And so somewhere, probably on YouTube from many, many years ago, there's a bunch of girls, because they were filming, there's a bunch of girls in an elevator at a roller derby conference and me, the crazy bitch in the back going, I could feel that I had the choice. I could feel it coming up of I can either just go with this or I can be a crankball. And I chose crankball. I very easily could have gone the other direction. Again, this was Capricorn. Capricorn felt like she needed to defend me, that these girls had this affront, that, this was the most horrible thing and how dare they do this. That's what role Capricorn had for me on that day. So these are just a couple examples of how Capricorn has led to me. Let's move into a section where we talk about one of the most important things, self. So let's get into sort of a more kind of nebulous part of this, as if the rest of this wasn't nebulous enough. So we have a part of us that's not a part. I know that sounded weird, but it's who we are without any parts on. It's called self with a capital S. And I like to picture self as sort of, it's the Barbie doll when she's not wearing any of her outfits yet. It's the paper dolls that they had back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, where you get this sort of just like base doll and she's wearing a little brawn panties or a little, peignet set or whatever it is, and you get to decide what outfit to put on. So maybe you make her a little sailor, maybe you make her a Girl Scout, maybe you make her put her in her pajamas. So we all have this base part of ourselves with, it's not a part. We have this base aspect of ourselves that is self. It's again, us with no part on. So self has these 8 C's that define who we are. And I can never remember all 8, so I'm just going to read them. Compassionate, creative, courageous, clear, curious, confident, calm, and connected. And if you are exhibiting any of those characteristics, that means you're in self. From self, a couple of things happen. From self, which is again, void of any sort of ego state on it. From self, you get to decide what part you're going to put on. So in the elevator, I had this glimmer of self when I could feel these 2 parts vying for how we were going to let this play out. From self, you get to be more present to other people's states. So it was self that watched my husband not do the bed the way I would have liked him to and made the decision not to let Capricorn jump out and say, just do whatever. Self allows us to be in that place of compassion and clarity when we are helping other people. Can you imagine how you're going to respond to people differently at the office if you're not stuck in your own drama, trauma, and triggers? This is the really cool thing of self. And to me, to get into self, one of the most easy ways to do that is from curiosity. I mean, really true curiosity. To get curious about another person, about yourself, about that environment, about that experience, about what's happening, about the communication. When you truly drop into deep curiosity, you are putting yourself into that place of self. And how you know if you're in self is you're going to ask yourself this question in this specific way. How do I feel towards that person, place, thing, situation, or me? How do I feel towards that person? And if the answer is anything other than those 8 C's, if you say, God, I have such compassion for them, I can see they're really upset. Or how do you feel towards that person? Wow, I really am curious as to what brought that up for them. Then you're in self. How do I feel towards that person? God, I can't stand when they do that. You're not in self. How do you feel towards that other part of you? Oh, I hate when I act like that. You're not in self. And the reason I phrase it of how do you feel towards that person? How do you feel towards them, as opposed to how do I feel about them or what do I think about them? You're bringing up a thinking part. How do I feel towards them brings up that aspect of self. So a couple of ways to get into self, that deep curiosity is one. Meditation, mindfulness, getting into that centered version of you. Sometimes if you're in a state that's getting overreactive, a way to kind of reset that is take a shower, take a bath, go to sleep, eat something, walk outside, take a couple deep breaths. Those are ways to help that state sort of calm down so that you can get back to that place of self. So here's how to start identifying these. So I recommend, and there's, so many people doing this work, but this is the way I recommend it. You can get these cards and go through them and start to pick out your parts. But if you don't want to do that, get a tablet, a piece of paper, whatever. I actually recommend you write this out in longhand, as I've talked about in my other talks, because longhand just has a better connection to the subconscious. So I recommend you write these out in longhand, pick 3 parts. Just 3 to start with. And you can do this by those categories. I have a manager part, I have a worry part, I have a pleasing part. Or you can say, I have a sporty dad, I have manager mom, I have, you can do it by what they like to be called. And if you're going to name the part, I will tell you this. Pick the name they want. I had a client come to my office and she said, Kathy, I don't know what to do. I can't get off the couch. I come home from work, I sit on the couch with a bottle of wine, I watch Netflix till 2 or 3 in the morning, and I just can't function. And I said, well, let's talk about this. I said, what part of you is sitting on the couch? And she closes her eyes for a second and she goes, lazy ass. I went, oh, do you like to be called lazy ass? I said, does that part like to be called lazy ass? If it did, that would be great. Maybe there's a part that's like, I'm lazy ass. And she kind of went inside a little bit and she goes, no. And I said, okay, what does the part want to be called? And she thought about it for a little bit and she said, it's 14-year-old. And I said, oh, what does 14-year-old want? 14-year-old wanted to escape because she didn't want to adult. The last time she had adulted, she buried her husband. She had just died from cancer. And so she had this small part of herself that was like, I can't handle that again. That was too much for me. So I'm going to distract from everything adult, right? So she went to work because she had to. But as soon as she got home, she didn't want to manage going through his stuff, dealing with the paperwork, letting more people know. And so 14-year-old decided a bottle of wine and Netflix was the best course of action. And so we negotiated with this part and decided that this part could have 2 nights a week where it could have a glass of wine and Netflix till midnight. And we were able to find some middle ground where this worked. So this is an example of naming your part. It's also an example of negotiating parts, which we'll get into a little more detail in a second. So you've written your 3 parts down. So here are the questions I want you to ask. What does that part do for you? Write down what that part does for you. Write down where that part came from, if you know. I'm going to say right now, childhood, but when? Capricorn showed up when I was being bullied and teased and picked on, and she wanted to protect me from that. So if you can figure it out, where did that part come from? And then here's a really important question. What is that part afraid will happen if it doesn't do its job? Capricorn was afraid that I'd be hurt. Capricorn was afraid I wouldn't be loved if she didn't do her job. The worry part might be afraid that you're going to make a mistake. So I'm going to worry through all of the possible scenarios so that you can think about them so that you won't fall into those traps. The pleaser part might be like, if I don't help people and I don't form my identity as pleasing, then no one will like me and I'll be shunned from this organization. The angry part might say, if I'm not up in here angry defending you, then everyone's going to take advantage. So again, you can see all these parts really do have a good purpose. They think they're helping. Sometimes they just get out of control. They're just doing a job that's not right for them. So again, Capricorn is afraid I'm going to be hurt and unloved. She thinks I'm still 10. So when I started doing this kind of work and I asked that part, how old do you think Kathy is? She's like, well, like 10. These parts don't know we're full-blown adults. They don't know that we have this sense of self that can help manage these things. They think we're still a kid. So often when you start to work with someone and you start to do direct access where you're talking to these parts, they think you're still a little kid and they think that you can't manage these things and that you have to be there. So in a different way, doing inner child work, which was big back in the 80s and 90s, I know people still do it. Doing inner child work was basically talking to these exiles. It was helping heal those little kid parts inside of ourselves. So I want to briefly touch on negotiating with parts. This is a little more advanced technique, and often people can't access their own parts. They can't talk to their own parts. So it takes a coach like me or a therapist or something to help access those things. I can talk to my own parts. I've had clients in my office that can, and some that say, could you talk to them? So there's different ways to do this. But one of the examples that I like to have is before I got Capricorn under control, I will tell you, I don't Capricorn as much as I used to. Capricorn now lays in a hammock and she reads textbooks with a yellow highlighter that never runs out of juice. And when I need her, she comes out of the hammock and she does the thing. She doesn't jump in and take over in places that she shouldn't anymore, or usually doesn't. Occasionally, we're not all perfect. But one of the things that would happen if I would wake up in the middle of the night, let's say to go to the bathroom, Capricorn would be like, oh, why don't I have you? And she would want to run through the to-do list, all these things that I had to do. And it got to the point where I would say, Capricorn, I appreciate you telling me all these things we have to do. I appreciate you warning me that there's stuff that has to happen, but the rest of us have to sleep. And the longer you keep us awake, the longer we're going to sleep in the morning, and then we're going to have no time before work to do these things that you would like us to do. So how about this? How about I promise you that we're going to do this stuff in the morning if you let us go to bed right now? I would actually say this in my own head. And for those of you that are thinking, well, I'm just talking to myself. Yeah, we talk to ourselves all the time. This dialogue is constantly going on in our head. So yes, it is just talking to ourselves, which we do all the time. It's these parts that have that chatter. Who do you think's talking? It's us. So I would have this conversation, and it got to a point where I would say, Capricorn, I appreciate, and I'd be back out. So you can negotiate with these parts. Sometimes someone else notices a part in you, and they can kind of step in and help, sort of like what I did with the shame that my husband felt, or the I didn't do it right part that popped up in him with the whole bed making thing. And here's one of the things the parts are afraid of. They think we're going to get rid of them. I will tell you right now, you cannot get rid of a part. We will not get rid of a part. If you go to a therapist or a coach that says they're going to get rid of a part for you, that's not how this works. We are not out to get rid of parts. We are out to make the parts healthy. We are out to make the parts whole. We are out to make the parts stick to kind of the job that they were made to do in the most loving and compassionate way possible. So don't think we're going to start cutting off pieces of you. That's not how this works. We're here to balance the parts and make sure that their needs are met and that they are doing the job that is the most useful for us in the most efficient, effective, and compassionate way. So here's the bottom line. This is a pretty complicated system, and I do weeks of coaching with people when I start to address this with them. There are people that do this work all over the world. There are classes you can take to learn to do it, and like I said, there's so many books and so many videos and things that you can watch to start to use this system for yourself. It's really great to do it with a coach or a therapist because they can help walk you through all of these things. But here's the payoff. The better you know yourself, the better you can adapt to the situations. You're going to be a better leader. You're going to be a more compassionate, present communicator. You're going to have less reactivity and more presence in your life. You can choose what part you bring forward, like I did for when I found out my dad passed away. You can start to choose what part is going to do the job best. You wouldn't walk into your first day of work at an all-hands meeting and start to just hand out jobs to the people sitting in the conference room. You might have the receptionist, running the copier, and the payroll guy doing tech, and you might have the CEO sitting at the reception desk. You have to know what these parts do. What are their strong suit before you call on them to do things. So the better you know these parts, the better you map these parts. Not only will they function better for you, you can call on them to do things. You can call on your version of Capricorn to stand in that meeting and really direct people, or to discipline someone who did something wrong, or you can call on a more compassionate part to be able to really hear and feel what that person is saying to you. And all of this comes from self. So the more we can curate that strong sense of self, the better off we're going to be. And your relationship improves. Just as a side note, the more my partner and I learn about each other's parts, the fact that we can recognize in each other when parts shift is better for our relationship. We're not as reactive. We're not getting feelings hurt because we know what that is. And we can sit down with those cards and say this and this and this. Let me give you another example of how this can work for you in your relationship. And this just isn't about personal relationships. This is also about work relationships. Capricorn is great at managing things. But at some point, Capricorn gets a little overwhelmed, and it tends to be because in the past, when Capricorn would schedule things, it would be down to the second. And if something would go wrong, I couldn't find my purse, the computer wouldn't take my password, I couldn't find my keys, I would start to panic, and I would go into this absolute frenzy. I called her Crazy Lady. She liked to be called Crazy Lady, so it was okay. So I would go from Capricorn, who could manage everything really well. Then I would go into Crazy Lady, and this was a very spastic sort of manic state. And Crazy Lady could only last for about 10 or 15 minutes before she burned herself out. And then I would go into shutdown. And when I hit shutdown, no matter what you said to me, no matter what was happening around me, I felt nothing. You could drop dead in front of me, and I'd step over you and be like, oh, well. Now, I didn't get into shutdown much, but here was the issue. When I went into shutdown, my husband thought I was mad at him. We've all had that, right? Someone goes into a place where they're just inside themselves and you're like, oh my God, what do you do? So his thing was, what do you do? Are you okay? And he would kind of go at me trying to get reassurance that everything was okay. Well, everything was not okay, but it had nothing to do with him. So after one of these occurrences very early in our relationship, I sat him down and I went through the cards and I said, this is what happens. And he very smartly said, once you hit shutdown, what can I do? And I said, space, time. You just have to give me a minute. I just have to wind my way out of it. I'm not going to stay there all day. And you know me, I'm a good communicator. If there's something wrong between us, I'm going to tell you. So I said, you just have to let it go. And so fast forward to, geez, maybe 6 months ago, I was sitting at the computer and I couldn't get this photo to it was driving me crazy. And I needed to leave. And I was starting to get into crazy lady. And all of a sudden he's right there standing behind me, like trying to help me. And I finally said, what are you doing? And he said, I'm trying to help Capricorn so crazy lady doesn't come out so you don't go into shutdown. And I said, well, can you not do it from right there? He was like all up in my business. But we recognize that in each other. Imagine how this is going to help your relationship. Imagine this is how you're going to help you interact with coworkers. You're not going to be a slave to that reactivity. You're going to have a deeper understanding of not only yourself, but those people around you. And for those of you with kids, you're going to start to see ego states forming with these children. You're going to start to see these adaptable states starting to come online. No matter how good a parent you are, they're going to happen. This is just being human, right? So start to work with these states, know them, map them. You are going to be better off for it. So that is the explanation why you are different around one group of people than you are the other. I hope that made sense to you. I know this can be a complicated system and it can be a little heady sometimes, but this is the simplest way that I know to share all of this knowledge with you. Now, look, I covered a lot in this video and it dealt a little bit with stress, but this is not the whole picture. If you want my full stress reduction course for free, go ahead and click that video right there where you're going to learn tools, tips, tricks, and techniques to make sure you are less stressed, less reactive, more responsive, more present, so that you can be a better leader, a better communicator, and better in relationships. It's completely free, so go ahead and click on it. And if you're an event organizer, an HR director, or a conference planner, and you want to bring this content to your people, click the link in the bio below and let's jump on a call and see how I can help. I have brought this system into organizations for retreats where we go through and map everybody's parts and then have one-on-one or team coaching to figure out how everybody's interacting and how they are triggering each other. It is massively useful in organizations and can allow your staff to be more productive, less reactive, and better communicators. So go ahead and click the link and let's jump on a call. I'll see you in the next one. Have a healthy day.